What's going on, guys? Welcome back to Comic Source. My name is Billy, and today we're going to be talking about Hawkeye. I know it's been a minute since I've uploaded, but I'm excited to get back into this, so let's just jump right in. But going back to when this show first started, just like everybody else, I really wasn't too excited going into this show. I didn't think that we were going to be getting that much. I thought it was just going to be, kind of just filler in between WandaVision, Loki, and then Spider-Man, and then we get Doctor Strange next year. I thought this was just going to be filler, but it actually turned out to be really good. And also that 2-episode day one drop that they did on WandaVision and here in Hawkeye, I love this. But it also has me thinking, because when they dropped the 2 episodes day one on WandaVision, that was because they were shorter episodes. They wanted to drop those 2 30-minute episodes and then get everybody into the universe. But with this one, it was 2 hour-long episodes, which gets me thinking because eventually we lead into episode 5 being released right before Spider-Man comes out. Which gets me thinking, does something in the finale pertain to Spider-Man specifically? And if you've seen Spider-Man, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. Because obviously in the trailer, we see that the Statue of Liberty is being remodeled with the Captain America shield, and they did mention that in episode 5 of Hawkeye. So I'm just kind of wondering if the finale is going to pertain to something that has to do with Spider-Man. But enough about that overall topic, let's just get into the first episode. I love the fact that we started off the first episode back in 2012, which is obviously the inspiration for Kate Bishop's adventures. But revisiting 2012 is kind of like when a song that you haven't listened to in a while comes up on shuffle, but you love that song. It's just a great time to be back in 2012. Especially when you think about how far we've come and how many movies we've had and how different it was back then when we were only expecting 1 movie every year, maybe 2. And now we're getting 5 projects this year at least. And then not to mention that this entire thing is a one take. This entire thing is shot so gorgeously. Up until the dichotomy of the fact that Clint Barton's moment of failure in Avengers 2012 when he thought all hope was lost is the exact moment that gives Kate Bishop her hope to become an archer just like him. And then obviously one worry that we have with this show is that, it's only 6 episodes. How do you forego the origin story, if you will, and get straight to the steak and potatoes? And they did that wonderfully with the intro sequence of Kate Bishop's upbringing displayed in a comic format using her color scheme. I thought that was great. And another thing I love about this show is that right off the bat, they get in with the emotional message of, just like in the other Disney Plus shows, they're tackling a specific piece of trauma. To where in WandaVision, it was obviously grief. In Loki, it was acting outside of the status quo and not living within the boundaries that people have set for you. The whole thing was about Loki trying to be his own person. And of course, in here, you have the double emotion set of Hawkeye's physical trauma, him being hard of hearing, as well as the emotional trauma of having to go through that war in New York and then watch that war be displayed in a comedic fashion on Broadway. And then, of course, this is a big deal because in the comics, Clint Barton is deaf. And I know we all thought the same thing when Kate Bishop's mom walked into the room. When I saw that she was being played by Vera Farmiga, I knew that she was going to have something else to do in this series besides just mom that's in the background. She's way too high of a caliber of actress to be able to just be there for no reason. And that was the same thing when I saw Tony Dalton come into the fold, who I had just seen in Better Call Saul Season 4 as Lalo. He kind of has the same personality in these 2 shows, to where it's all just like a big caricature. Like, I know we all thought the same thing as soon as we saw Tony Dalton, that man is hiding something. And another group of people that are introduced in episode 1 is the Thrusta Bro. I love these guys. They go hand in hand with my next point, which is that the comedy in this series is just on point. All of the actors have just such tremendous chemistry with each other on screen, and the comedic writing is just on point. But yeah, that was a great intro into Clint Barton and Kate Bishop's relationship, obviously with the ending being that he caught her in the alley, which leads us into episode 2. So episode 2 kicks off right where episode 1 ended, with them in the alley, and it doesn't slow down from that point. It just continues on with the fantastic comedy, with some actual great action that I wasn't expecting. I really love, even though they included it in the trailer, which I have beef with trailers. The move of catching the Molotov cocktail in the window and throwing it back is just elite. It's just elite. There's no way around it. It's just elite. But along with the chemistry of Jeremy Renner and Haley Steinfeld, we also get a continuation of the great chemistry between Vera and Tony, who are putting on this huge performance to try and prove to their daughter that they're not evil, but they are. And this brings us to our new friends of the series, the LARPers. Which, at first I was skeptical. I'm thinking, why are we even at a LARP? Like, what are we doing here? But the scene is hilarious. It helps ground our heroes in the same fashion of the Spider-Man PS4 game, where, you can run around and you can high-five random people on the street. Just help, connect your hero with the everyday man, But yeah, this whole scene is fun. I enjoyed it a lot. I wonder if the slow motion sword fighting is kind of like a little reference to Jeremy Renner's movie Tag, which I had never seen, but in the trailer they were jumping around in slow motion, like some really wild tag maneuvers. So I feel like this might be a little reference to that. And then of course this brings us to Kate v. Jack, which, you know, you could see this as a kid being outlandish, just trying to like test the new person in the household, you know, like typical weird relationship status things with like a new stepdad coming into the fold. But Jack's being a dick. I'm sorry. And come on, Mom. Like, how much do you know your husband? Of course you know that he is a great swordsman. Why are you letting him toy with your daughter like this? Stop being weird. To help your daughter. And then, of course, we get my favorite joke in the series where Hawkeye is trapped by the Trust of Bros, and we get that interaction with Kate Bishop as Not Guy. I know a lot of people don't like that the MCU does that. They feel that it kind of breaks the tension, which in some situation it does, but I feel like in this show they're doing it perfect. And then of course this brings us to the end of the episode where we meet Maya for the first time, which this is just another instance of them having the subtle details perfect. And I'm not sure if this is common knowledge or anything, but I feel like I learned this from a TV show or a movie. I just can't put my finger on which one it was. But I know that it is a thing for people that are deaf to feel the bass and the vibrations from a song, like with their hands, to be able to hear the song. And that's exactly how she started off this scene. So I just love those little details. It shows that they actually care about what they're doing. And then not to mention that the song that she was listening to was fire. But then that leads us into the most emotional episode, in my opinion, episode 3. Which starts off with our child version of Maya trying to cope with being deaf in a school of all non-deaf people. Which the way that they displayed this is just another instance of the small details being important. I know it's obvious because we can all read subtitles, but you know, she's only catching every other word because her teacher is facing the other way. And then of course the conversation between her and her father, which also mentions dragons, you know, right after we got Shang-Chi with the Great Protector. I doubt that that's like, you know, an actual hand-in-hand reference, but it's just cool because dragons actually exist in the MCU. And then of course we get the first instance of Wilson Fisk in the MCU. We all know now, after watching episode 5, that it was him. But it's crazy that they could just throw a hand and a laugh in a scene and we all know exactly who it is. Which brings us to the death of Maya's father, which I love these scenes with Ronan actually like going out and just being brutal. Because with Moon Knight to be slated as the most brutal and violent MCU show to date, we're taking small baby steps to being able to have the Punisher in the MCU. Because as you know, Daredevil was confirmed weeks ago. Fisk is now confirmed because we saw him in a picture in Hawkeye. I wonder if they could be able to bring Punisher into the universe, because as we know, the Punisher is a little bit he's too violent for Feige's universe. He wouldn't be able to fly in the MCU. But if they were able to increase the violence that we've seen, perhaps we can get to an instance where maybe we can have just a tiny bit toned down Punisher in the MCU. And then I love the contrast between Maya and Hawkeye where, you know, they have to communicate between sign language and she kind of looks at him sideways for using a hearing aid, feeling like without it, he's going to be a lot more lenient on his senses. And that's exactly what Maya is. She just uses her eyes and her skills to be able to win fights. And she feels like hearing is something that draws back from her ability to do that. And then, of course, right after this, that's when she knocks out his hearing aid. And I love this entire fight. Because it's about damn time that we see Hawkeye do some cool-ass shit. Like flipping over a balcony and shooting arrows across the room. That's cool to me. But I wonder if there's going to be another instance of this in the finale, because obviously they went back on this immediately with him repairing his hearing aid. Because, you know, after this, he starts to just turn off his hearing aid in certain instances, like in the diner with Kate. And then, of course, this brings us to the car chase, which is a fantastic one-shot. I'm so glad that they're putting so much effort into these action scenes and how they're actually shooting them, because it makes a big difference. It really does. And then again, with the comedy of them going back and forth, because, you know, obviously Clint can't hear her, so they're saying the same thing back and forth. And I love this entire sequence. And I love the Pym arrow, which means that now Hank Pym is much more inclined to work with the remaining Avengers or anybody that's an actual hero. And I think that's really cool, especially, you know, with how he started in the MCU. And then, of course, when they get back to the apartment, we have the phone call with Nathaniel. Thug tears everywhere in that scene. Thug tears. And then, of course, they threw in just a tiny bit of Kingpin hype everywhere, where Maya and then the upper agent and her organization were talking about the big boss and what he wants. And then, of course, Kate and Clint were talking about the same thing with a big boss that wants to stay in the shadows. Who's a big boss that we know wants to stay in the shadows? And, of course, in the diner scene where I talked about earlier where he turned off his hearing aid, we get just a little bit more of a possible implementation of why the Punisher could work, where he said, I'm not a role model to anyone. These type of scenes kind of feel like Frank Castle talking to somebody in the Punisher, and I'll go into that a little bit more later. And then, of course, this episode wraps up with us finding out about Sloan, the shell company that Jack is owning. I am so excited to see how this wraps up. And this brings us into episode 4, which had a slower start to the episode, but it ended as a banger. And I'm skeptical about everything. I believe absolutely nothing. I believe 0 things. 0. So when Kate is getting tricked by Jack and her mom with the little dance and the smiling, no, charade. I believe nothing. I believe nothing. Kate can get tricked by that, but not me. Like, that scene really makes me look at it like it's not just Jack trying to prove himself to the daughter and the wife as, that he's a good guy or whatever. It's Jack and Kate's mom proving to Kate that they're regular, normal people when they're really just evil people. And then when she goes to meet up with Clint, I'm just going to go out on a whim and say that there was liquor in those smoothies. I know that they were having a good time. Like, they had to have been, right? But this leads me into the next instance of where I believe that the Punisher could be baby stepped into the fold. When Hawkeye said that it's just a game of managing loss, he continued to do what he was trained to do, which is to hurt people, and that his past is tied to him. That entire performance felt to me like exactly what I was saying earlier, where it's Frank Castle talking to somebody in his show, where he's talking about how his past is tied to him, how he was literally used as an assassin. But I love how Clint is going about this in this next scene, where he's not just going around trying to beat answers out of people. He's not like any other, like Daredevil specifically. I know Daredevil is a greatly more dark show where that's necessary. But I love that Clint is going around actually trying to make sure actively that people are not getting hurt. But of course, this leads to the ending of the episode where Yelena catches up to them at Maya's apartment. And I love how they brought her in. And I love everything about this scene, about the fighting, about the choreography, about how there was the parallel between Kate falling and saying, pull me up, rather than Black Widow falling and saying, let me go. But I am just so tired of TV spots for Marvel. I am tired of it. Because why is it that 12 hours before the episode comes out, we get a shot in the trailer of Yelena in that Splinter Cell type mask that she had on, which she wears in the comics. So immediately people knew exactly who was going to be in the episode. With that being said, as I said before, the parallel in that scene between Natasha and Kate Bishop is just tremendous. And then, of course, that brings us to the most recent episode, episode 5, where they intro with just an insane way to show how the blip worked. That bathroom scene with Yelena is just raw. And rather than than it tapping into the chaos that we saw in WandaVision, where Monica Rambeau came back in a hospital, it taps straight into the fear of somebody that was blipped. And of course, the person that the fear is being tapped into is a highly trained assassin, so God knows what's about to happen. And I love that, as well as Yelena's immediate confusion about Natasha. Just a great intro to the episode. And at first I was a little skeptical of Maya's revenge. Obviously it's warranted, what she's doing is warranted, her father was murdered and everything. But at first it just kind of, didn't make sense how she was doing everything to me. Like, it was just kind of not light, so to speak, but maybe it's just because we weren't following her specifically. It didn't really fold in neatly to me. But learning the fact that it was really her boss that kind of commissioned her father getting murdered was what kind of folded everything over, and it helped me realize that this is just blind rage. And it's really cool to see because she's having to use all of the non-verbal cues to be able to act this out. Which brings us to the Kate and Yelena meeting inside of her apartment. And I've said it a million times so far, but the comedy in this scene is perfect. And honestly, it made me want to eat some mac and cheese. But it's not only just the comedy. They weave in tension and they weave in emotion perfectly in this scene. With Yelena obviously having the same blind rage that Maya does about her father, with Natasha and her thinking that Hawkeye murdered her. But it also displays what the public's knowledge of the events of Endgame are. Because nobody really knows what happened to Natasha Romanoff. And I just realized I haven't said this yet, but shout out to Pizza Dog. Such a good boy / girl. Because, in the show, it's a good boy, but in real life, she's a girl. You get what I'm saying. Either way, fantastic dog. And then, of course, this leads us into Jack's arrest, where he's still at the height of his caricature abilities, talking about some girl that he was dating before. And I love it. It's a weird mixture between an actual just mustache-twirling villain and somebody that has some actual depth. I'm very curious to see what else we're going to learn about him in the finale. And I'm very glad that they had that scene of Clint walking up to the memorial for the Avengers 2012 battle. Because Clint and Natasha's relationship is some of the most underrated pieces of the MCU since they've shared a movie for the first time in 2012. It's just a consistent, cannot get any closer, blood could not make you any closer relationship that is just amazing. And of course, I have to include the scene of the two Russian dudes in the truck where Hawkeye shoots the arrow at them to leave them the note for Maya. Everything that dude does is hilarious. The way that he was screaming as the arrow came in through the window actually had me crying. And also, I wanted to steal this point from my friend. He said that when the arrow came in through the window, it kind of reminded him of the old school Joker bang guns. And I think that's hilarious. Then, of course, we get the big battle between Ronin and the tracksuits, led by Maya. This kind of reminds me of the Season 1 fight of Daredevil versus the Russians, where it was Claire being captured by the Russians, and then he had to go through the parking garage and take them all out one by one. And it really tapped into the fear of who he's facing. And in this scene, it really taps into the fear of Maya, where, she wants to use her hands the whole time, but as soon as she gets scared, gotta whip out the blicky. And then again, they reiterate the fact that Clint really doesn't want anybody to get hurt. That's not his goal here. Anybody else would have killed her right there. And then, of course, we get the complexity of the fact that Maya cannot trust her boss, who we know who it is now. And this could also be foreshadowing for her turning on Fisk in the finale, which I'm kind of expecting at this point. And then, of course, if she does turn on Fisk, this could lead straight into the Echo series that's coming out for her on Disney+. Which, side note, her and Daredevil did fight in the comics. Do with that information what you will. But we did it, boys. Not only do we have Daredevil confirmed in the MCU, we also have Wilson Fisk confirmed by photo. And I could not be more hype. But I'm extremely excited for the finale. I wonder how much Wilson Fisk we're actually going to see in the episode, because going into Loki, I didn't even think that we were going to see Kang at the end, but they put him in. So God knows how much we're going to see Wilson Fisk next episode. I hope that they do a little intro sequence, kind of like how they did for Maya last episode. Introduce some people that might not know Wilson Fisk like we do. Which, if you don't know Wilson Fisk, I'd love to do a video on it, but I'd also love to just point you in the direction of Daredevil on Netflix, which is unequivocally the best Netflix original of all time. But yeah, the three things that I'm hoping for in the next episode is that we get a Fisk intro big time, and then we get to follow him through the whole episode, hopefully. Maya switching sides to help Clint and Kate defeat him, as well as I hope that Yelena doesn't succeed in her mission before finding out that Clint did not murder Natasha. I feel like that's an emotional beat that they could possibly try and hit on, and it would make sense, but I'm not ready to say goodbye to Hawkeye like that. But I'm so glad to be back. Hopefully I can get out a video about Spider-Man soon, and if you guys have not seen it yet, sucks to be you. Please go see it, and try not to get spoiled. But I'll see you guys next week. Peace.